I'm concerned about school closures in Phoenix #1 and throughout the Valley. First, I want to acknowledge and offer my support to our neighboring Roosevelt School District Board and community. Tonight, they're leading over school closures, and many community leaders are concerned that their school closure plan has targeted schools that are Black-led and have historic and cultural ties to the Black community. Closing these schools could have detrimental effects on equitable efforts within the Black community. As Phoenix #1 continues to look at the future of our district, I'm concerned that we are not adequately considering the impact to our communities, especially our most marginalized ones. So far, I have attended 2 of the reimagined charrettes led by architects. I appreciate the time our staff and community has taken to participate. However, I'm concerned we are only presenting one side of this issue to our community in an effort to steer things in a preferred direction. Also, I noticed that although district has indicated everyone is invited to these meetings, they may not be accessible to a lot of folks, considering 4 of the 5 meetings are held on Mondays at 4 p.m. and all have been given in English using academic language. My hope is that we will be transparent with our community. Yes, changes might contribute to schools by having more teachers and students in grade level, in buildings or special programs. However, it's important to also discuss the lasting negative effects on a community when neighborhood schools are consolidated and closed, including how these changes can accelerate gentrification and create more barriers by expanding school choices, which often aren't really a choice for all people. I hope we keep equity and those who will be most impacted at the forefront of these conversations. I want our district to find a way to include more of our community members, especially those who will be most impacted before decisions are made. As a board, we need to hold ourselves accountable for these processes and how they align to our values. Thank you. Okay, I would like to share that on November 2nd, I attended the Dunbar Charrettes on Saturday. So thank you to the families that were there in attendance and shared your ideas. And last week, I also had the opportunity to visit with G-Road for their after-school program, and I got to see the wonderful partnership and how they're really helping provide the after-school programming and support that we need as a school district. So thank you to our partners at G-Road. And do we have any other board members report? Okay. Moving on to student outcome focused governance. Thank you. You're not familiar with our student outcomes focused governance model that we have adopted since September of 2022. Here is a quick rounding of work and what we've been doing here for the past 2 years. Next. So we believe that student outcomes don't change until adult behaviors change, or said differently, when placed in the context of governing, patterns of behavior that are exhibited in the boardroom can reasonably be expected to be found paralleled in the classroom. The intention of the governance model is to translate existing research and the collective experience of dozens of board members and superintendents into a set of tools that boards can use to identify what's working and what's not working, as well as to track progress along their journey toward improving student outcomes. You will see we have the 6 competencies that make our framework. We have vision and goals. And the responsibility of the board is to carry out the vision of the community. School systems exist for one reason, to increase what students know and are able to do. Second, we have values and guardrails, and governing board members represent the vision and values of the community, and they rely on the superintendent to determine how to accomplish the vision while honoring the values. Next, we have monitoring and accountability. Boards may adopt goals, but the effective use of time monitoring the goals are a skill the board needs to develop to hold the educational system accountable. Number 4 is communication and collaboration. The board will lead with transparency and include stakeholders in the pursuit of the goals. Number 5, we have unity and trust. The board will lead with one voice in its pursuit of the goals. And last, we have the continuous improvement, that the board must be dedicated to the cycle of continuous improvement by paying attention to what's working and what's not working. And here are 5 board goals. You can see our first 2 are focused in our early childhood literacy and mathematics. Our third goal, which we will be touching upon today and hearing from our staff, is around our goal around our English language learners. And our last 2 goals are on the middle school literacy and mathematics. And next, we also have our superintendent guardrails that help guide our superintendent to things that are outside of the academic achievement component, but still are very important for our district to run efficiently. And then we have our board guardrails, where we have 5 guardrails that we have adopted. We will be reviewing number 3 today. And next. And that's it. We'll pass it over to item number 2, discussion on board interim goal number 3. Good evening again. This evening we are looking at progress monitoring of goal 3. This is an interim goal where we are saying that the percent of English learners increasing at least 1 placement level as measured by iReady Reading Diagnostic will increase from 45% in spring of 2023 to 55% by spring of 2024. And so when you look at our data last year, we were on track with that progress that we were doing. The percent of English learners increased last year, and I have to blow my screen up because I cannot read that tonight. But we increased from 32% in 2023 to 36% in 2024. So we are on track to continue to make that progress. And that's actually to 55% by 2028. So when we look at the next slide, this is interim goal 3.1. And here we are looking at the data with a new view of how students are performing. In the year previous, we looked at the data from fall to spring, and this year we're looking at it from fall to winter. The intention behind that is that when we're looking at it from fall to winter, it gives us an opportunity to create appropriate interventions so that we can get students to the success point. This leads us to one of our questions from Governing Board President Bueno. As we're looking at that data on that slide previously, she was wondering, why do gaps between the student groups exist? And so if we can flip back to that slide so that the public can see that, you'll notice that the number of students in the groups is different in each group. Smaller numbers tend to have greater variability because scores in the high or the low range can skew the average more dramatically. When you look at the overall total, you can see that there is a 26% increase of 1 level of proficiency, while smaller groups such as African American or Asian have a higher percent of students showing more than 1 proficiency level. That's one way that you account for the difference in the gaps, or in the variability of the gaps. The other reason that there are gaps is where students come in and what their prior knowledge is prior to coming to our programs. So students always start at different starting points, and based on where they start, we have different groups, different growth that we need to make with them. But the biggest issue in terms of looking at that really is the sample size for each of these different groups. The next question comes from Vice President Trujillo, who's asking, what does increasing foundational literacy skills
look like currently, and what should we expect to see in the future? And so I'm going to have Mrs. Gonzalez, who is our language acquisition coordinator, speak a little bit to this because she's working very closely. And then Mrs. Gafonia, our principal at Dunbar, where we have our newcomer center, will also speak to some of the work that is happening there in terms of what does this look like there.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, cabinet, and our community members. For our students and for in general, we have foundational literary skills are addressed through structured reading in our ELA core, also to walk to read using 95%. Our EL interventionists have a portion of their time that they focus on reading foundations. One of the things that we did this year, Sarah Rizar, who's not here today, but my thought partner, the specialist, we developed targeted ELD curriculum maps that really focus on reading foundations. They exist in the content standards, Arizona content standards, but they also exist in the ELP standards, the English proficiency standards. So we want to make sure that we align those. And in those targeted curriculum maps, we also address how specifically they will be assessed in the Zella so that our teachers and our EL interventionists are aware of how to measure our students moving towards that area. Are they capturing that skill? Another portion is a lot of our EL interventionists and EL teachers have gone through letters, which is we're very fortunate to have in our district. I remember as a teacher being in 4th grade and having students that just had a lot of need in reading and knowing that I had to go back to school because that was the only way I was going to get to know how to address these needs. So having that on site in our district that our teachers can benefit for that because it really does give them an understanding of the course structure of language, of phonemes, and specifically for our ELs, knowing that there's differences in that learning, that we need to be aware of the English phonemes, especially those that may not exist in their native language. We know that THs and others are not common for our students. So getting them used to that, understanding that there are exceptions. It's not a transparent language, especially for our students in Spanish. We know our vocales, but in English, it's so many rules. And so being very specific of addressing those with our students. We see that in our newcomer program. We saw a lot of growth from this last cohort that went to 10 weeks. But the area that they lacked in was the reading foundations. And so we had to sit down and rethink how do we, one, incorporate more of that reading time to address those and really look at the data and what is specific that we need to differentiate for our students in that program. So, and in that same form, that's what letters also puts our teachers to, is really getting an idea of where are those gaps for our students so that we can address them and make a path for our students to be a better readers. And we know that our EL students get assessed in ORF all the way up to 5th grade. So we need to ensure that we're addressing those, not just up to 3rd grade, but as they move on. And what we're seeing as we move forward is we need to have more of a focus for our upper grades because we do see that there's a strong K-3 reading foundation focus, but as we get into the upper grades, it kind of slowly diminishes and we address. So what for us as EL interventionists for the past 2 years, we've been monitoring oral reading fluency, but we know we need to go more in depth to see what are those gaps so we could address them. So that's in our plans to make sure that we look at what intervention programs are out there that might help us address that as well. I'll let Ms. Gafonia talk about Dunbar's.
Good evening, President Bueno, members of the board, colleagues and cabinet. Thank you, community members, for being here tonight. So a lot of what Ms. Gonzalez spoke about, I would echo. What I would say is really nice about our new curricular resources, the HMH, is that they have really embedded a lot of the great SIOP or the sheltered instructional strategies into a lot of the lessons. So Last year, we had the benefit of some really awesome professional development from Mary Lou and Sarah with our entire staff. And then we attended the QTEL training, many of us this summer. And we were able to see how the new curriculum resource really highlighted language development. Because we were an ATSI school for our EL learners last year, we paid special attention to language development. And because that was our one thing, we continued with that this year, but we expanded it from a focus on student discourse to the reading and some other areas that we didn't see grow as much. So we are focusing this year more on the reading foundation, but also vocabulary and the writing. And what we noticed was that many of the students who were experiencing those early literacy skills or not experiencing them during COVID, we were seeing them impacted in 4th and 5th grade this year. So we strategically placed some of our fiscal resources. We have the benefit of an early literacy grant. We have the comprehensive literacy development grant that Sherry Zeeb has done a really nice job of providing to us, and then also using some of our Title I money to make sure that we had not just EL and early literacy support for K-3, but we have also support now in our 4th and 5th grades. And we're seeing that that's really important. So I would say the other thing is with a focus on vocabulary and really our one thing being that we want all students to access the grade level content. We want to make sure that all content areas, especially our special area teachers and anybody who's interfacing with our students is also focused on that vocabulary and the reading. So like, for example, I observed an art teacher doing a lesson yesterday on the Native American totem. So students were selecting the animal that they wanted to represent them for Native American Month. And she had them use a writing protocol where they were highlighting some of the key academic vocabulary, but they were including some writing skills. So teachers are making sure that no matter what they're exposing students to, they're including the reading, the writing, and especially the vocabulary focus. Let me see if there was anything else in terms of the reading. I think another thing that's really been a big emphasis that the leadership teams have brought to us, so academic leadership as well as Dr. Gonzalez and some of the district experts, has been the word coherence. So it's really important for students to experience coherence throughout their day. So we've done some empathy walks and really looked at the students and as they're transitioning from our exceptional student classroom to an EL interventionist back into the core instruction, are they seeing the use of the same materials? So we want to see that they're not seeing a lot of disruption when they're transitioning for their additional interventions. Like Mary Lou suggested, we're doing a lot of diagnostic testing when they are showing less than grade level proficiency in reading foundations, and then we provide them with the walk to read so we can identify specific skills and work on those. I think that would be about all I would say about the reading piece. Any questions you have about that?
Thank you, Ms. Gafonia. And then the next question from Vice President Trujillo, what are the district reading benchmarks? And are these benchmarks the reason for the change from fall and winter outputs, plus the time periods being used instead of spring data from the last interim goal? And I'm going to let Dr. Ailshire speak to that one.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. Good evening, President Bueno, to our wonderful governing board members, to cabinet, to our community, and everybody watching at home. Thank you so much. So we actually have a host of different benchmarks that we use depending on the grade level. So I'm going to kind of give you a sample of what these are. So we've got iReady. The iReady assessment is done through grades 2 through 8. So that's when you hear us talking about the iReady assessment for the reading. In addition, that we have the literacy benchmark that includes specific risk levels for reading fluency. So that's a different one that we utilize utilize. And because it provides a risk level, we use that for 2 and 3, grades 2 and 3, because those are such hot spots that we really need to make sure that we're supporting those students because of Move On when reading. We really want to make sure we've got that nailed in tight to support those kids in preparation for 3rd grade. And we also have an iReading diagnostic that's utilized for grades 2 through 8, which I already mentioned. Grades K through 1, we have Ames Web Plus, so that's a separate one that we do, and it does early literacy, whereas iReady is more geared towards later literacy as we go through. And then we've also added, as you know, because we think we covered some of those data points earlier, as the writing assessment. We've got a writing assessment now that we kind of bring in because we realize that that is an area that we need to make sure that we're paying more attention to, and its connections to early childhood literacy and beyond. So we've added that writing assessment. Specifically also for our ELs who are really struggling on the writing portion of the AZELA assessment and providing them opportunities for being able to practice those writing skills. In regards to all these assessments impact our window that we're doing, as Dr. Gonzalez pointed out before? No, these are assessments that we've been utilizing up to this point. The reason for that change is for us to make sure that we've got that benchmark data for the winter time, so that we can make the right changes that we need to ahead of and toward the spring. So when we've actually in the past said, spring data, it was more like we were giving it to you in February, right? Because we don't really do spring assessments in the quote unquote spring, because that's when we do ASA. That's when we have our state assessment, and we don't want to compound that with additional benchmark assessments and lead to benchmark burnout ahead of the actual state test. So looking at it from a more realistic standpoint of that winter benchmark is one of our most important, because that really gives us a very clear snapshot of time of this is where we're headed. This is what we can anticipate on the spring assessment, unless we make some changes or we continue to support some of the things that we're doing so we see that growth.
So as we look at the next slide,
Dr. G, I've
Oh,
got
yes.
one quick question. The writing assessment, what grade levels get the writing assessment?
Is it 3rd through 8th? 3rd, thank you. I'm looking at my principals. When did we just do this?
I
Yes, it's
assumed it
3rd
was
through
the
8th.
lower grades, but I didn't want to guess on which one.
Yeah, I got help from the audience on that one.
But I just needed to
appreciate
be
that.
reminded. Thank you very much.
Yep.
we appreciate the phone a friend opportunities. Thank you. So on the next slide, we're looking at the EL proficiency levels, and now we're looking at it by school. And so you can see our staff have identified what are the things that are working, and then what are the things that need more attention. Dr. Lloyd has highlighted in our middle column the progress that is being made from winter to fall 22, 23, 23, 24. And then winter 23, 24 to fall 24, 25. You can see the progress that students have made, and he's highlighted those by different colors so that you can see which schools are on track. Those are kind of our light yellows, and then which schools are exceeding, those are our greens, and then schools that we know we need to provide a little more attention and intervention to. You can see the target for winter 24, 25 in the dark yellow column. So the next question comes from President Bueno. And one of the things that we said is working is the SIOP training. And again, SIOP is the Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. And this is a research-based observational protocol of observing teacher practices in the classroom that are designed to help build English language learning skills. So the question asks, what is the strategy for motivating more teachers to participate in SIOP trainings? And can you elaborate on the type of data that will be used to determine professional development for these? So I will turn that over.
And actually for this one, Ms. Gonzalez and I will kind of tag team some aspects of this. And so correct me when I'm out of my lane. All right, appreciate it. So regarding the SIOP protocol, in regards to how do we motivate teachers to participate in SIOP training, I'm going to go back to what Principal Gafania said in terms of coherence. If we make it one more thing that we're kind of training people on, yes, then you're having to really kind of now work on why should I be taking this? But if we can make it coherent in terms of we embed it actually in what we are doing, and it's just something that we as a district are focused on because we know that these strategies are best instructional practices for all students, that's where the ripple effects of that initiative take hold. So to motivate is not necessarily what we're looking for. We just want to embed it into all that we talk about and do when we talk about tier one instruction. It's a really powerful strategy for us to do. So that is definitely something that we're looking at in terms of how do we do it? We don't want it to be seen as one more thing, but really embedding it now into the language of what we do as a district in terms of the strategies that we have, the feedback that we provide, and the professional development that we provide, which leads me to the second part of your question, which is the type of data that will be used to determine that professional development. That's going to come in two different motions, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the SIOP walkthroughs that we're currently doing. So we, and when I say we, this is our incredible language acquisition department, our CNI department, developed a SIOP walkthrough protocol. The SIOP is actually a fairly large instrument. So, you know, when you go in and walk out, you're looking at 20 plus different things. We've condensed that into 5 really powerful low-hanging fruit that we can really provide instant feedback on, but also we will be able to craft really good professional development on. So those key indicators that we're looking for in the SIOP walkthroughs, which we're doing on every campus, every month with the support team, as well as instructional leaders on the campus. So that's happening from here on out. We're coming in and doing these walkthroughs. Focus on learning strategies, scaffolding, higher order thinking, student-to-student interaction, and wait and think time. So those are the things that we're actually looking at and really just using a very simple scale of, we're not seeing any evidence of that yet. We're seeing some evidence, and we're seeing ample use of these strategies. The other thing that we really want to make sure to do is, led by our language acquisition department and our entire support team, is really, and our principals, calibrating on what that actually means, right? Of what, when we see those strategies happening once, we see some evidence, right? But if you're seeing it happen 2 or 3 times in the course of a 15-minute observation, you're developing enough evidence, you're saying is being used amply, right? So utilizing that kind of data, then we're trying to create our just-in-time professional development that we can provide to principals, who in turn are going to be able later on to provide that to their teachers, and for us looking ahead of in the summer and in the future, as we look at this goal, how do we embed more of this professional development into it? So for example, this afternoon, Mary Lou and I were meeting and talking about, based on the data that we're collecting right now, what would be the professional development that we're seeing, and putting all this data together of 2 different walkthroughs at every single one of our campus. Think wait time is a really easy one to do, right? Where we can really, as opposed to saying, who can answer this question? Teachers can scaffold that in a different way, in which they say, you know, I want everyone to think about this question for a moment, and then utilizing a sentence stem, encouraging students then to have conversation with each other, right? So in this way, it's not the first hand that goes up that gets called on. It's an opportunity for all students to kind of think about that, and then providing them with an opportunity and training on how to kind of engage in academic discourse and discussion with each other. That's a really low-hanging fruit to train teachers on, and something that we think we can be able to put together for our principals, provide to our principals, and in turn also look at what are we doing as a district to provide that additional ongoing professional development. How do we embed it into our professional development with our new teachers, and other aspects of way that we can embed it into everything that we do. Ms. Gonzalez, did I miss anything on that?
Add that we know that our principals are working hard, and they're also strategically working on ways to incorporate best practice. So these are best practices that may have other terms, but they are in one. So we specifically picked out ones that shouldn't be new. They're best practices that we've been supporting for our ELs that are good for all our students. The other piece is that we want to be transparent with our teachers. Here's the form. Here's what we are going to be visiting you on, just so that they're aware. Okay, this is something I already practice, so this is where I'm at. Use the rubric themselves to rate themselves and where they want to go. So that's kind of just what I would add, but you did a great job.
I think you did a great job. Very supportive in our department. Nice.
So as we go to the next slide, this actually leads into the writing assessment. This is a new interim goal for us, interim goal 3.2. The percentage of K through 8 English learners increasing at least 1 proficiency level as measured by district Azella interim writing assessments will increase from a baseline collected by September 2024 by more than 25% by spring of or January of 24-25. So in this one, you'll notice on the bar graph you see, or the line graph, that we had a 0 at the beginning when this goal was written and approved by the governing board. So we had to do the assessment to develop our baseline. So our baseline is now set, and that is 13%. So the goal will now change from 13% to the greater than 25%. So if we look at that data and then look on the next page, once again, you see the what is working and what needs more attention. Last board meeting, board member De La Rosa asked the question of, do our students have a chance to give feedback on the assessment? And so I recently met with our Superintendent Student Leadership Advisory Council, and we were talking about the writing assessment, and it's a brand new assessment for them. And I asked them how it went, and one of the students said, oh, it was really long. And then I said, did you get feedback on it? And he said, yes. And I said, how many of you had thought it was long or thought it was, but you got feedback on it? They all raised their hands. Yeah, we all got feedback, which is good to know. But then the other thing that the students, I said, so you take the writing assessment on AASA, how many of you felt like you had been prepared to take the writing assessment before? And only a couple hands went up. So then I said, do you feel that the writing assessment you just took and the feedback you received, is that going to help you do better on the AASA writing assessment? And they all said, definitely. So I do think it's important for us to constantly come back and monitor what are student perceptions of this. And granted, these are 7th and 8th grade students, but we are trying to prepare them for high school. So being able to see if this is going to be something that helps them better prepared, I think that's an important aspect. So when we look at the writing assessments and see how they did on this slide, once again, you can see the color coding that Dr. Lloyd has presented, and you can see several of our schools, Dunbar, Edison, Emerson, Herrera, and Magnet, all have already exceeded the target based on the level of proficiency going up for our students. So looking at our next question, Vice President Trujillo says, congratulations to all the students and staff for their efforts in meeting our last interim goals target and the growth currently going on. I wonder what you have noticed in the staff and students since they're having met this target and during the transition to this interim goal. So we're going to let Ms. Gonzalez and Ms. Gafonia respond to that.
And can we go back to the previous, just to do some clarification really quick. So for the writing interim, this was exciting for us to add because we do have benchmarks for writing, but nothing specifically for Azella. So this year we wanted to have one specifically for Azella because it's a separate rubric from the ASA. So these assessments were for kinder through 8th grade, and we made it to be in the same format that they're given to our EL students. So K1 is paper and pencil. So we did it paper and pencil. 2-3 is a hybrid where, well, actually their grammar questions are online, but the extended writing is on paper. 4-8 is all online. So we are using our platforms. That's how we wanted to deliver them to the students. So it was exciting for us because now we have another interim to measure. Where are we missing? Because we know that reading and writing are the areas where our students struggle. So that's the way we would have better understanding of how to address writing with our students. The other piece to notice on the data, I got to speak to the red because all of our EL teachers and all of our teachers, but our EL interventionists work very hard. So that 1% could be very crushing for somebody. But the understanding is that this is also using Azella proficiency. So even though that school may have had a lot of students move from a 0 to a 1, that still didn't move them from pre-emergent to a basic, which is what would bring up that growth. So my response to some of our interventions was, now that you have them at 1, you're going to get them to 2. So by the next time, your percentage will increase. So so there is progression going. Just wanted to make sure that was included. As far as the question, I can go back to the question now. Any questions with that? Okay. All right. So as far as the question, I would say that it was a big celebration for our team to meet that goal. We know that when originally we were like, no, we know that our primary students will bring it up. So it was a celebration, but it was also a celebration for our students because in our program and our goals that we've set out to do for our students, that we're seeing that. So it's a genuine feeling to see that all these plans are going somewhere because it's being impactful in our students. So I would say that when we had our reclassification ceremony here, we didn't expect a packed house, but we had a packed house, and it was exciting to hear our EL interventionist say, well, next year we need to reserve the pack because we're going to have even more students. So, and that's just reclassification. A lot of our schools celebrated just the growth. I mean, in our newcomer program, we had students go from pre-emergent to intermediate, pre-emergent to basic. And it's just the work that we're doing is heading somewhere. So that's the celebration for us. And I guess is that it? Yeah. Oh,
In terms of what that looks like at Dunbar, I just wrote celebrations down to start with, just because that's what we always focus on. And I think that's the best news for teachers, right? The reason that they're there is to see students grow. So when they see something that lets them know that the hard work they're doing is amounting to something, it just encourages their motivation and their commitment. And then also too, when we meet with the parents at the coffee, we talk a lot about student goal setting. We have them get on Parent View. We want them to really be familiar. That was one of our goals in our school integrated action plan, was really including parents in the data and making sure they understood how to help the students progress. This Friday, we're actually going to practice homework with them because they don't feel like they know how to do homework. So we collected homework. But going back to the celebrations, we did really well last year with our focus on student discourse, and we saw a great improvement in the Azella domain for speaking. So for teachers, they were really excited about that. And even to go back to the question about how do we make the SIOP training motivated in terms of how will teachers want to be involved? And when they see other teachers sharing the celebrations and they see the difference that they're making when they're analyzing their instruction, that in and of itself is very motivating for them to want to do more to help. And not just our English learners, because language development is something that we're focusing on school-wide so that all students can access learning.
You understand why we have the people who are closest to the students and the teachers responding to these questions, because they have such concrete examples that are really important for us in understanding. So our next question from Vice President Trujillo. What is the difference between the column on slide 7 labeled Winter 24-25 target and the column on slide 10 labeled October 24-25 to January 24-25? And Dr. Lloyd explained this to us, and unfortunately he wasn't able to be here. His children are in a performance this evening, but Dr. Ailshire is prepared to respond for us.
So again, I'm here channeling my inner Dr. Lloyd, do my best to make sure I do that with passion and excitement. So in regards to those different, those are really good observations and insights. So I definitely sat down with Dr. Lloyd and kind of went through what the difference is. So part of it is we have different measurements for these two different things. As Dr. Gonzalez pointed out, and as the team just pointed out, the data on slide 10 on here, where we're looking at the 3.2 in terms of writing proficiency, because we're starting on a baseline of 0, it gives us a different trajectory of what we're looking at. So on the column labeled Winter 24-25 on slide number 7 indicates where we want our students to be by our winter benchmark. That's December, but we're utilizing iReady and Ames Web. That's the measurement for that particular slide in that particular table. As for the slide on column number, or slide number 10, where we're actually measuring the writing assessment, that is done, again, as we point out, with the baseline of 0. So the column number 2 shows the growth from baseline. Now, well, it was, but it started at 0. So we started at 0% with August because we had never done it before and we didn't have a baseline to go with. And then now we go to 13%, which is now that we've essentially done it. So it's a totally different type of measurement with a totally different type of assessment, which is why you're seeing that the dates aren't necessarily like we'd have done before, where it's like winter to spring type of thing. Are these, because of the way these assessments are measuring and the way that we're outlining them, they're going to have different sort of timeframes of where they end? We'll make sure our audience
It
can
was
hear you.
just, the next one be in January in preparation for Azella because our Azella window opens January 27th.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And our next question comes from President Bueno. Which data point is supporting the statement that training for teachers and leaders in best practices for language acquisition is working? And again, we're going to have Ms. Gafonia speak from her personal experience with her staff.
So at first I was going to talk about Azella, and then I thought, I think the most important data point is happy teachers and happy students and families, because really we've worked so much on the culture, and even our family and community engagement specialist and our team is working on attendance. And when you look at all the research, you can think about all the things to eliminate barriers, or you can really just make learning a really nice place for students to want to be. And what we're, with a little bit of incentive here and there, we're seeing attendance. So I really believe that when students feel successful and teachers feel like they're helping students feel successful, that's the most important data point. But we did, I mentioned before, on the domain of speaking last year, we saw a great increase, and I really believe that correlation was due to the work that we did with Mary Lou and Sarah, and really focused a lot of professional development. And so we thank the district office and the team in CNI for giving the site more professional development time on Wednesdays. But professional development is more than a day or a few hours. It's the collaborative team meetings that we have weekly. It's the professional development that we have with our leadership team. We have a member of the academic leadership team attend weekly leadership teams with us so that we can look at data and we can talk about what we need. And they can help us celebrate, because sometimes we forget the great work we're doing. It's looking at all of those different pieces and providing very continuous professional development for the teachers. And our teacher evaluation document or instrument, that whole teacher GPS, really supports coherence as well. So when Mary Lou spoke about all the different strategies that are good teaching strategies as well as good language acquisition strategies, those elements are all part of our Phoenix LOI. So teacher to student interaction, student to student interaction, those are things that we train the teachers on and we evaluate them on, but we also provide professional development. They select their teacher action plan element, and many of our teachers at Dunbar selected things that align with language development. So that's really nice. And nobody's really mentioned learning acceleration, but the grant that we have with Makisa has been a huge benefit because it's very focused on student assets. It's very focused on making sure that we really believe that all students are capable of learning, and we're not looking at remediating students and drilling all of the skills that they don't know from the last 3 years. It's about really planning strategically and knowing what they need. That's, if you talk to Dr. Lloyd, he says, look at your iReady, look at the priority standards and use those to teach these lessons to students so they're prepared to access the content. So it's a combination of a lot of things, but the professional development happens when we are supporting the learning of teachers, of the staff, and then we have the support from the district with all of the people that I've mentioned that come and really help us to focus. And I think even the goals that you've determined as a board together have really helped us focus, because even though we've talked a lot about EL, our early math focus has helped us focus within a content area. So really all of those things are speaking to, what was the question? How do we know that the training is working? So training is bigger than just attending PSYOP, right? Training is what we do all the time. And when people talk about professional learning communities, it's really, I'm getting goosebumps now because I'm thinking about how my teachers come into the office and they start sharing about materials. That's a real professional learning community. That's how you develop as a learner, when you feel safe and comfortable and you know that the work you're doing is making a difference. So it happens throughout the day. It doesn't happen just one time a week and I feel like we have a lot of support in that regard from the district, and people are there to really help us. So it's all of those things with continued focus. And again, the learning acceleration strategies are very great tools that really emphasize being very strategic about how you're planning your target lessons and how you're using, they call them tip charts, and they're being very clear about vocabulary and the academic vocabulary. So that really helps all of our students understand and access. So I'm really proposing that this year, when we take the Azella, that we're going to see a lot of gains, not just on the Azella, but also in all of the other assessments that we're taking. Looking forward to the iReady benchmark this winter as well. So I hope that helped.
I would just like to thank Ms. Gafonia and all of our principals, because I actually, last week, I knew that there's just so much going on for our principals. I gave Mrs. Gafonia an out. I said, don't worry about presenting. I know there's a lot going on, so we'll do it without. And she said, no, I think I can do it. I'll take a look at the slide deck and see. And then this morning she shared that having the time to pause and reflect and look at the work that she's been doing over the past 2 years was actually incredibly rewarding. And I think it's evident every time one of our principals has spoken about the work that they're doing, and just you can see the pride, and you can see our students are growing and our principals are being able to take a moment to reflect and celebrate the work that they're leading on their campuses. So it's just a really, I feel incredibly proud of the work that our teams are doing. So thank you. And so that does conclude this presentation.
Thank you. I just want to note that we have Ms. De La Rosa with us. Hello, Ms. De La Rosa.
Hi, good afternoon or evening, everyone.
We couldn't hear you. Could you unmute one more time and test that we could hear you? Ms. De La Rosa.
Great.
Okay, give me a second because I do want to make sure that we can hear her. Ms. De La Rosa, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me? Hello?
Okay, we can't hear her. Would you mind putting in your vote in the chat when we have a roll call vote? And just communicate with us in the chat, please. Is she writing in the chat? There she is. Okay, thank you. We just finished our interim goal number 3. And we are moving on to I motion the approval of the student outcome focused governance progress monitoring report of board interim goal number 3.
This is Carmen Trujillo, I'll second. Roll call for President Bueno,
Yes.
for Dr. Alicia Vink,
Yes.
roll call for Vice President Carmen Trujillo,
Aye.
and for Ms. Erica De La Rosa.
I see a yes. Thank you. With that, that motion passes and we're moving on to item 4, discussion on superintendent guardrail number 3.
So for superintendent guardrail number 3, the interim goal, or the interim guardrail, excuse me, the guardrail itself says that the superintendent shall not allow the district to operate without a system designed to recruit, employ, and retain diverse staff who reflect the community and meet the needs of our urban district students and their learning environments. So we'll go to the theory of action very quickly to help acquaint people with our thinking behind this. The input is that we need to have a solid onboarding process and that we need to have a recruitment plan that helps recruit staff from institutions that support diversity. The outputs of this work will be an employee handbook and greater diversity among the candidates across our open positions. And then the outcomes are improved employee retention, increased hiring diversity, and of course, improved student outcomes. So when we look at the interim goal that was adopted earlier this year, we said that by May, or excuse me, interim guardrail, by May of 2026, this district will have clearly documented and streamlined hiring processes that include an employee handbook and onboarding process for every employee to ensure all future employees feel welcomed and honored to be part of the Phoenix #1 community, generating a satisfaction rating of 85% or higher as measured by surveys of new staff within the first month of their start date. We identified targets that we would use to start putting this into place. And so for the 23-24, we know that we need to develop that personalized onboarding process. And so Dr. Bowman has been working with a committee, and I will let him speak to some of the work that he's been doing in that regard. But what we expect to see in terms of implementation for this year will be a printed employee handbook, implementation of the interview protocols at all of our sites and departments so that there's consistency in the processes that we use. And this is something that our teacher associations and professional support staff association have also asked for. And to develop evidence-based practices for new teacher mentoring and an update on policies for employee transfers. So Dr. Bowman, do you want to talk a little bit more about the work that you've done to date in that area with your committee?
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez, Board President Bueno, Vice President Trujillo, Board Member Dr. Vink, and Board Member De La Rosa on online. Cabinet and community member and community members that are listening in. It's nice to be here this evening. We did some extensive work the last spring on onboarding processes that we started to implement this year. We saw a really nice coordinated effort, an interdepartment effort between MIS, curriculum instruction, and human resources and benefits. And by doing so, we received incredibly positive feedback, but we have work yet to continue to do because we need to expand that and scale that to all employees who are hired in our district, not just a select group, but we've started there. We have good early feedback on that. And that our work this year is going to be to expand that and to scale it into all of our hired positions so that when we hire a person, any person into our district, that we've created that welcoming, targeted environment that we know that they are fortunate, we are fortunate to have them be part of us. And we've very explicitly planned for how we're going to welcome them into the district for early success. So that's exciting work to be part of. And I'm really proud, just candidly, with the committee and to be a member of that team. Secondly is on the handbook, we have started, we is HR, so we have a draft started. And that what we need to do now is work very closely with ESPA and PECTA and also our other administrative groups to get this handbook way more refined than it is right now. But we've started it. So when we start doing our collective work together, it's not from scratch. And what we've done is we've looked at some of the other neighboring districts. They have some pretty good employee handbooks. And then We have a draft that we have and we're working on that. So that's where we are in that process. We will have our goal achieved by the end of this school year by having a printed one. But I hope that when we do that, it's also already going to be online. So we hope to overachieve on that one. The other one is develop evidence-based practice for new teacher mentoring. I'm happy to report that, led by the C&I department, that this work has begun. So we have a program that's begun, and if you want to say more about it, you can, but I think just knowing that it's in process, it has been started, and we will continue. Also, like everything, we're always committed to being better. So the first iteration is implemented, and then we will keep growing the program. So kudos to C&I and their team. So, and Sarah, thank you. And then update policies for employee transfers. That's a big one. And you'll see later tonight that for our meet and confer this year, that's one of the big topics for ESPA and for PECTA. We absolutely support updating our internal transfer process for our employees. So that's happening and starting in earnest, coming up within the next month or two.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. And I do want to give Dr. Aylshire a moment to talk about the evidence-based practices that we're using for the new teacher mentoring. I did have a chance to sit in one of the meetings recently, and it's incredibly positive. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Aylshire to talk about it.
Thank you, Dr. Gonzalez. And again, could not be more proud of our team. This was something that we just wanted to really make sure that we began this year and built on. We wanted a new teacher orientation program that lasts for at least 3 years for our teachers. So this is just year one of year one cohort. And then they'll go through a 3-year process to ensure, because we know the research is very clear that if you don't provide that continual support throughout those 3 years, you will lose them. So a one time a year type of thing is not going to work. So we actually bring them together monthly. We occupy various spaces in our beautiful building, and the team always is really working to strategize what is the PD that they need right now. So going back to the idea of coherence, for example, we realize that many of our new teachers have never undergone any PSYOP training, any training to even know what to look for or how to work with English language learners. So that was a PD right off the bat that we wanted to make sure that they were aware of, going back to our district-wide goal in that area. But it really spans the spectrum of what are good instructional strategies, but also just sort of what is the emotional roller coaster of being a new teacher and what they can expect and what they can feel, and just creating that collaborative group together that really is positive and is really supportive. And it's just that opportunity to continually come back and connect every month for just-in-time professional development and opportunities just to reflect on the difficulty of the work, but also how rewarding it can be when you reflect together.
Thank you. So then we move on to interim guardrail 3.2. By May of 2026, the district will increase the pool of candidates by implementing a plan to recruit staff from historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic serving institutions, and Native serving institutions, as well as other networks supporting pathways into education with staff who match the demographics of our student communities, demonstrating an increase in the diversity of our hiring pool by 15%. And so again, we identified a step-by-step process of what we would do this year and then next year to begin that. I'm proud to share that Dr. Bowman has already been meeting with different members of our staff. Ms. Baker, excuse me, is also part of that as somebody who is responsible for our community relations. Didn't mean to marry you off right away, sorry. But making sure that we have a cohesive plan, and that a big part of that is what we do in communications to be able to address that. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bowman, who will, or you can actually go to the next slide, I'm sorry, to show what those different metrics are. So conducting an applicant diversity analysis is the first piece, identifying colleges and universities with certificate programs that support the needs that we have in our district, developing recruitment committee to reflect the diversity of our student population, developing our materials. This is where communications comes in and is very important, but then also working on evaluator interview bias training and making sure that when you sit in on a hiring committee that you go through training that is sensitizing you to potential interviewer bias. So with that, Dr. Bowman, I'm going to let you talk about the applicant diversity analysis baseline data that you've been able to gather.
If you could go to the next slide, please. What you'll see with this data is we can pull from Talent Ed, which is the software we use for applications. You can pull the number of applicants for any period of time. So we chose, I shouldn't say we, I chose to take a year's snapshot of applicants just as a baseline. That would be from July 1 of 2023 to June 30 of 2024. It's a full year of data, knowing fully that some of those in the earlier months might not have been interested in applying for the school year. However, we then take a look at who we actually have employed and what the ethnicity of the employment of our employees are, and also broken down by race. So you can see further refined data that we have. I'm just taking a look at it. You can see the number of applicants over that year's time, and we had over 6,000 applicants for positions that we had available. And now that does include duplicates. So if somebody applied for more than one job, they get counted as an applicant. Just want to make sure that you're aware of that. And then you can see the data that when you ask ethnicity on our application, that's the first question asked. So we have really good, solid data on ethnicity. That the no responses is a lot lower. But then when you look the next question that's asked about race, it further refines it and you have a lot more no responses. However, what we're going to do when we start looking at data, we're going to look at, I think it'll be good comparable data year after year, because we're going to look at the people who do fill it out. And it's a good starting point. It's a good baseline to take a peek at where we are. And then we can start then analyzing way more whether these efforts that we are targeting to include going to some of the colleges and universities that were mentioned earlier. In addition to that, we're doing targeted marketing to select areas so that we can use online resources as well. And we participate with at least 4 different recruiting services that are national. So we are getting our name out there, and we do get a good number of applicants. And as we've talked about already this year, our increase in the applicants and the quality of the applicants in our pools are way different than they were even a year ago. And that's a testament to you, governing board, and for this community who work really hard on getting a more competitive compensation system into place. That's really a testament to that. But I look forward to continuing to analyze the data. This is just baseline. It's a starting point. Wanted to show that to you tonight to see where we are with that.
Thank you, Dr. Bowman. Any questions?
I don't have any other than a comment of thanking you for sharing the data, because I think this is the first time in my 4 years that I've seen this type of data shared. So thank you for the deep dive and your continuous support of making sure that we're hiring staff. And so no, I don't have any questions.
That concludes the presentation on interim guardrail number 3.
Thank you. Moving on to, I motion the approval of student outcome focused governance guardrail progress monitoring report of superintendent guardrail number 3.
Alicia Vink, I'll second.
Vote count for President Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
for Ms. Erica De La Rosa, for Dr. Alicia Vink,
Yes.
and for Vice President Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you. With that, our motion passes, and we're moving on to discussion of board self guardrail number 3, which is that we will not deviate from the board's operating procedures. We had approved a draft operating procedures in the summer. And so there's some components that we still need to fill out in terms of our mission and vision statement. So we are still a work in progress for full transparency. And moving on to community communications. Do we have any online?
No.
Thank you. Okay, I have one in person. Mr. David, you will have 3 minutes.
Can I get a point of clarification before we start the project? Last time we had some statistics up here, something like 700.
I'm sorry, can you speak in the mic? And this is for public comment for 3 minutes.
Last year, if I remember right,
You're starting. This is part of your comment
that
if you're
17%,
gonna.
21% achievement rate for that grade level, was that all the students?
Sir, we can
Do I
respond to
understand that?
public comments.
Can she shake her head? Okay, the way I heard it, that's 17 to 21%. Oh, brother. I've been thinking of that. That's a joke. It's a mockery, whatever. I went, just to remind everybody. I'm 80 years old. I went to Whittier Grade School, graduated 67 years ago in 1958, Phoenix Union, Phoenix College, ASU 1970, whatever. I'm not an educator, but I'm opinionated. And 67% of my tax money for county real estate taxes going to education. And the way I see it as a non-educator, they're not being educated, especially COVID. And then I'm talking about budget too. And it's my understanding this diversity, that's a hot button. Equity, diversity. Diversity means you're putting other categories down to raise up others here. You're not getting the cream of the crop on doing that. And the Supreme Court in June 29th, 2023 said that's against the Constitution, 10th Amendment of the Constitution. I'm no lawyer, but I think a public official that goes outside their authorized boundaries, they can be personally sued, something like that. And phonics. I'm getting the feeling these kids aren't learning anything. It's like their brothers and sisters are teaching them. Like my 7-year-old sister taught me how to read when I was 4 years old type stuff, you know, and 18,000, what is it here? $19,700 per student in Phoenix Elementary. You can be going to a university for cheaper than that. And Alhambra, I mentioned it last time, Alhambra, just random statistics, 8,600-ish. I said, I'll move to Alhambra next year, but I won't. But that something's got to be done with the school. If I'm understanding it right, this is a joke. It's a mockery. It's an insult. But you're all polite. You're all polite, reasonable, and accepting of me. But bogus is bogus. And if you're ready for kind of an R-rated thing here and respond later type thing, it's a joke. Don't get offensive. What's a 4-letter word? What's a 4-letter word that ends in K that means intercourse? Talk. I didn't know that until 20 years ago. It's supposed to be ha, 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 ha. So I guess my clock probably ran out. But phonics, it's my understanding from 25, 30 years ago, that's how people learn how to read. And these are human beings that God created, and you're not doing them justice to, and I feel, oh, good news, praise report. It's my understanding Trump's going to get rid of the Federal Department of Education. It's my understanding Reagan wanted to get rid of it. It's a bunch of, I'm not an educator. It's a bunch of regulations. Get you all tied up on administration here. And the kids ain't learning nothing. Bottom line, it's about, and I think you brought it up to begin with, it's educating the children. And it's my understanding that the teachers' unions are running the schools across the country. It ain't about the teachers' unions. It ain't about the teachers. It's
Thank you
about
for
the
your
kids.
comment. Have a good evening.
Thank you. God bless everybody that's got ears to hear.
Moving on to our consent agenda, I motion that we adopt the consent agenda.
Alicia Vanker, second.
Vote count for President Jessica Bueno,
Yes.
for Ms. Erica De La Rosa, for Dr. Alicia Vink,
Yes.
and for Vice President Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you. We're moving on to executive session. The governing board may convene in executive session pursuant to ARS Section 38-431.03A5 for the purpose of discussions or consultations with designated representatives of the public body in order to consider its position and instruct its representatives regarding negotiations with employee organizations to address, meet, and confer recommendations. I motion that we adjourn to executive session at 6:34.
Alicia Vanker, second.
Vote count for President Jessica Bueno,
Aye.
for Ms. Erica De La Rosa, for Dr. Alicia Vink,
Aye.
and for Vice President Carmen Trujillo.
Aye.
Thank you. We will be back when we are back. Thank you. Yeah, I saw it earlier when they changed her name. I'm just gonna give Carmen a moment to come back and join us. It says resume, so. Okay, we can get started. It is 7:40 and we will return to regular session. Moving on to closing items, board member requests.
I have one.
Go ahead.
My request is for an independent equity audit of the right sizing and reimagine process before we go forward with any future decisions about school consolidations, closures, builds, etc.
Any future agenda items?
Yes. Future agenda item would be a receive and discuss of the right sizing equity audit.
Hearing nothing else, it is 7:40 and I call this meeting to adjournment. Our next meeting will be Wednesday,